My name is Charlie Hajichambi, and in this presentation I will be going through my work from last year, my work from this CCI year, and ideas for the future and how my work is incorporated into those plans and how CCI has developed those plans as well. So the first piece of work I wanted to start with was this piece. So this piece is a 3D printed mask, which I 3D designed myself, and the face behind it is also a 3D scan of the face of a drag queen whom I was making this for. And so we scanned her face, and then I directly sculpted and modeled the mask onto this scan, so that way we got a totally precise model and a totally precise fit of the mask. And I modeled all of this in Blender. And then so once I'd printed the face mask out, I coloured it using a chrome spray paint, just so it matched the appearance that I had designed it off of. And then this is the photo shoot in which the drag queen used it. And we were just kind of thinking about kind of transformation, using masks to change the face and transform the face, which then later on in CCI obviously came to play into the kind of object detection, face detection, AI, teachable machine sort of situation. This is another piece of work I did for the drag queen Crystal Versace. So she requested 5 exact replicas of their face for a performance they were doing at the London Palladium. So I scanned their face and retouched it in Blender, taking out things like the eyes and cropping the edges of the scan so that the print was neater and just better looking. And then this is the final render of the image. I think this is just a better way of presenting the mask in a way in which it looks nice and pretty and yeah, so you can kind of see what it's going to look like once it's printed, but kind of nice and shiny and everything. And again, this was also kind of thinking about changing the face, replicating the face, creating clones or multiple copies, kind of using technology and the kind of light sensitive scanning that I've been using to kind of capture all these ultra fine details. And then this is the final print. It came out really well. It was exactly to the millimeter the same size as Crystal's face, and she was really happy and really pleased with it. And yeah, this is another piece of work that I did. And I think also this kind of also comes into that idea of like replicating the face or replicating a specific face, and how that can kind of, or could possibly interfere with things like object detection. But I wasn't thinking about that at this current stage when I made it. This was just work. So this piece is getting a little more into the more artistic practice. So this is a hologram. It's a hologram fan. It basically works, it's got 2 propellers, and then along both of these propellers is a strip of LED lights. And then as these propellers spin, they spin at a super fast pace. The lights are then programmed to produce a full 3-dimensional image within the space of the spinning propeller. And so this piece was a hologram I did for the Centre of St. Martin's Open Studios. I was just kind of thinking about new bodies and different ways in which things can exist within space. So a hologram is kind of there but not there. And I like that kind of transient, kind of constantly flowing movement that a kind of hologram has, especially the way it kind of inhabits space. It kind of branches out of the sides of the walls and into the ceiling, and it looks different from every single angle, and it breaks its own kind of frame or its own kind of canvas, which is something that I was kind of interested in, just kind of looking at different ways in which forms create their states and everything. And then this is just further documentation from that presentation of the hologram. It was really good. There was lots of people crowding around it. It was a really kind of exciting evening, that Open Studios, and I was very happy with how the hologram turned out. And the hologram thing is also something I kind of want to explore more of. I've been having tutorials looking at the projection mapping and lenticular lenses, which I've been using in the final piece for the exhibition. And all of that is kind of very much interweaved with my kind of older practice and the hologram and this idea of new materials and inhabiting spaces differently and being seen in spaces differently. So for example, the cameras are unable to pick up the hologram effectively on sort of regular phone cameras, and so you just kind of get this bright streak of light as opposed to the image that you're actually physically seeing. So I kind of like that kind of the way the hologram transgresses the camera footage. And so I also have a performance practice that is kind of weaved throughout all of my practice, kind of do performances here and there. So for example, this was a performance at the National Gallery for Unit 7 of my second year. We were tasked to create a performance based on the collection in the National Gallery, and it was a collaboration between Central St. Martin's and the National. And this was the piece I did based on the depiction of devils and imps and goblins in multiple paintings throughout the National Gallery. And these are just some more images of my performance. Again, there's quite a large crowd of people, so I was very happy with how it all turned out. And I also got in a bit of trouble for naming it National Antichrist, because they said the word Antichrist was offensive. But I'd submitted my name too late for them to change it. So this is just another example of that performance, which I did in a different space. So I did that same performance at a rave called Riposte, and that was also really good. It was a very different way of presenting it, and I feel that the performance practice is kind of part of the kind of speculative thinking and of different ways of thinking about different ways of kind of interaction and viewership and audience and all of that. And then this is another performance which I also performed at Riposte. This was just looking at different ways of positioning the body, again, different ways in which you can interact with people, different ways in which structures frame the body or frame certain aspects of the body, and people's reaction and interaction with the kind of absurd or strange. So another thing that I feel also comes into my practice is where I work. So I work at Fetish Daddy Gear, and they are a clothing company that make bespoke fetish wear and custom outfits for, say, drag queens, performers, etc. And my job at Fetish Daddy is to take care of all the 3D printing and the kind of 3D modeling. And so a lot of the time we have a 3D scanner there, so we do a lot of scanning, a lot of kind of faces, a lot of things to do with changing the faces. As you can see, we make lots of sort of masks and different costumes that really change and shape the body to create different effects, whether that's, gender non-conforming or other kinds of effects like special effects or so on. So this is my Unit 2 project for CCI. This was really interesting in terms of trying to work with the new kind of technology and obviously the kind of new ideas and the new kind of like possibilities that kind of came with learning all the kind of physical computing aspects of the CCI course. I really enjoyed the physical computing aspect, and I created the Screaming Slime, which was a capacitive touch sensor, but made out of slime, and every time you pulled or ripped the slime or touched it, it would produce a kind of shrieking scream. and that was kind of an investigation into kind of interacting with technology and our kind of physical and tangible interaction with technology, as opposed to just our kind of, how our brains are interacting with it, or how our eyeballs are. So another part of CCI that I also really enjoyed is the AI and Computational Futures unit, when we are looking at stable diffusion and generative AIs, and also the kind of stuff about kind of AI ethics and AI morality, and that's kind of really played into the kind of final exhibition piece, in which we're kind of assessing and discussing and looking at the kind of ethics and in the kind of use of AI, especially within things like cameras and surveillance systems and such. And so the kind of research that came with the kind of essay writing, or the research that kind of came with just learning about databases in the diffusion models, for example, was just kind of a really interesting part that I was really interested in. And that is kind of very much being pulled through the kind of rest of my kind of practice, especially on CCI. We did a project sort of outside of CCI. This is kind of over the Christmas period, over the holidays, in which I called it Alchemical Artificial Intelligence. And what this was, it was just a kind of series of experiments within petri dishes, just kind of creating all kinds of different concoctions using different ingredients, similar to the way in which, a database, for example, in a image generator, a database will just mix together a series of images based on the prompt, and then create the image. Whereas this, I felt it was kind of a similar thing, in which you had your kind of ingredients, whatever, you mixed different ones together, and each different concoction kind of created a different form that you kind of just mixed together and left, and then came back and it would have generated something. And I felt that was kind of, moving along the same lines as kind of generative AI and kind of generative softwares. I thought it was just kind of interesting exploration, kind of exploring those kind of ideas kind of within AIs and around databases, but in a sense that's kind of a little more separate from the kind of technological side, just as a kind of conceptual investigation. And so this is a continuation of that experiment project, in which I 3D scanned the petri dishes. And so what this was, when I scanned them, I was kind of thinking about how to take the kind of generated form and then, expand on it and take it even further into the kind of, into a kind of more like tangible not tangible, but a kind of more speculative route. And so I 3D scanned the petri dishes, and it gave me all these kinds of different, forms and different, bits and pieces, and they all created totally random, kind of unique shapes and structures that I thought as three-dimensional images looked really interesting in terms of kind of speculative environments, and kind of using AI and 3D scanning and 3D sculpting within things like Blender or Rhino, in order to create these kind of semi-real, semi-possible kind of but hyper-speculative environments, but that equally have the opportunity to kind of exist based on the kind of fact that they're, you could essentially, print them or construct them or whatever. And then to even further that, these are just some slices of the 3D models of the scanned petri dishes in the slicing software for 3D printing. I kind of love looking at them kind of both with the supports on and without. They kind of look like, have a kind of environmental building kind of aspect to it, but then simultaneously kind of have a very organic nature to them, which I think in 3D modeling it's kind of the kind of digital stuff in general, it's kind of very easy to get stuck in something that looks kind of digital or looks very 3D printed or looks very kind of like mechanistic and formulaic, which is sometimes not totally pleasing. And then this final part of my presentation, I just want to talk about kind of things I'm thinking for the future and how to use my practice and the skills I've learned through my practice and through CCI in the future and such. For example, I've been doing lots of research into the kind of where 3D printing is most kind of apparent, just because it's a skill that I've learned, that I've been doing over for a year at work. I also use it in my practice at uni, so it's a skill that I really kind of want to stick with and focus on and kind of make as good as possible. So my research has kind of led me down the route of looking at industries, 3D printing industries in places like Dubai or Saudi Arabia, places like that in which the 3D printing industry is just kind of having a huge boom. So for example, in Dubai, they've started building all these kinds of recycled, 3D printed architectural kind of spaces. I like the way the kind of new Middle East is kind of offering lots of opportunity for kind of speculative design combined with kind of technology such as 3D printing and things like that. And so, for example, in Dubai, by 2030, they plan to have 50% of their buildings all 3D printed. And so industries like that are kind of things that I'm kind of mainly looking into, so I can kind of build on the kind of the skill I already have and kind of focus on it and grow upon it. Other industries in which 3D printing is being used is obviously one being fashion. I definitely want to, I don't want to go on to do a master's degree necessarily. I'd sort of much prefer to go into the industry, preferably, just because I already work with 3D printing in my job, and it's also a kind of creative aspect, and so I also kind of want to continue that into the future. I feel like a postgraduate might halt that a little bit, I feel. But in terms of fashion, 3D printing has obviously been making a kind of very prominent boom within fashion. If you look at designers like Iris van Herpen, they use lots of 3D printed aspects to create movement or different shapes or things that are more ergonomic or more tailored for the body. I think this idea of using 3D printing in which it can make things more efficient as opposed to more standardized is kind of, and make the idea that 3D printing can be something more individualized as opposed to standardized is something I'm kind of very interested in as well. And that's the kind of aspect that I'm kind of interested in carrying on into a kind of future career path or something. But that's my presentation. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.